Did the US create the Taliban? And did the CIA try to cover it up? This is the full truth the history books leave out. In this video, we pull back the curtain on America's longest war. The Soviet invasion and the CIA's secret funding that backfired. The rise of America's own trained enemies and a war that ended in chaos. Why did the Soviets invade Afghanistan in 1979?
Today, let us begin at the root. What was so important about this small country that it drew in a global superpower? At that time, Afghanistan was caught in the middle of great change. In 1978, a communist group in Kabul staged a coup and took control of the government. They promised land reform, women's education, and a new society built on socialist ideas. But these changes came too fast, and they clashed with the traditions of Afghan villages and tribes. Soon, rebellions spread across the country. The communist government turned to its ally, the Soviet Union, for help. By the end of 1979, the Soviets made their move. They sent in tanks, helicopters, and thousands of soldiers. Their goal was not oil or gold. Afghanistan was poor in resources compared to its neighbors. What the Soviets wanted was control. They feared losing Afghanistan to the West, and they wanted to keep their influence strong in a country that bordered Iran, Pakistan, and China. The Afghan leader at the time was Hafizullah Amin. The Soviets did not trust him. They believed he was unstable, and even suspected he might be working with the CIA. When Soviet troops arrived, they quickly removed Amin and replaced him with Babrak Karmal, a man they believed they could control. To many Afghans, this invasion was not supported. It was occupation. They expected the Soviets to stay, and they prepared to resist.
Why did the US join Afghanistan's war against the Soviets?
Once the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in 1979, the war became brutal. Villages were bombed, and families fled to the mountains or across borders into Pakistan and Iran. By the mid-1980s, millions of Afghans were living as refugees. But here is the deeper question.
Why did the United States care about a poor country halfway across the world?
The answer is the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a global struggle for power. The United States feared Soviet influence spreading wider. Leaders in Washington, D.C. believed Afghanistan was the perfect spot to strike back at their enemy. So the United States launched one of its largest secret operations ever. It was called Operation Cyclone. Through the CIA, billions of dollars in weapons and training were funneled into Afghanistan. But the United States did not hand these weapons directly to Afghan fighters. Instead of handing weapons directly to them, the CIA gave them to Pakistan's intelligence service, which passed them on to groups of its own choosing. This was the birth of the Mujahideen. They were Afghan rebels, heavily backed by the United States government, through money, weapons, training, and rockets. And later the Stinger missiles supplied by the US. These missiles could destroy Soviet helicopters, giving the Mujahideen a major advantage. Among the foreign volunteers who joined them was a wealthy Saudi named Osama bin Laden. The Mujahideen called themselves holy warriors, defending their land and faith, with US support on one side, and Soviet tanks and aircraft on the other. The war turned into a long struggle of surprise attacks. By the late 1980s, the Soviets were bleeding money and losing soldiers. About 15,000 Soviet troops never made it home. Finally, in 1989, the Soviet Union withdrew.
What happened to Afghanistan after the Soviets left?
When the last Soviet troops marched out in 1989, Afghanistan did not find peace. Instead, the power struggle grew worse. The Mujahideen leaders who once stood side by side could not agree on who should rule. Each commander carved out his own territory, controlling roads, valleys, and cities. Kabul, the capital, became the main prize. By 1992, rival groups were shelling the city. Rockets and artillery destroyed entire neighborhoods. Civilians were trapped between warlords, each claiming to fight for Afghanistan, but really fighting for themselves. Kabul went from a symbol of Afghan pride to a broken city of rubble and fear. In the countryside, lawlessness spread. Roads were unsafe, and trade collapsed. Families who had survived the Soviet war now fled again, searching for safety in refugee camps across Pakistan and Iran. Out of this despair came the Taliban. They first appeared in the southern city of Kandahar around 1994. Many of them were young men who had grown up as refugees, often educated in strict religious schools. They promised to restore order and to end the rule of corrupt warlords. Their movement spread quickly, fueled by Afghans desperate for stability. By 1996, the Taliban controlled Kabul. They now claim they were the government of Afghanistan.
Who were the Taliban, and how did they take Kabul?
The Taliban were not one of the older Mujahideen factions. They were something new. Many of their fighters were Afghan refugees who had grown up in camps across the border in Pakistan. When the civil war in Afghanistan dragged on, these young men returned home carrying not only weapons, but also an idea that they would cleanse Afghanistan of warlords and criminals. Their strength was not just their faith, but also their organization. Unlike the rival factions in Kabul, the Taliban moved with discipline. They won support from local traders who were desperate for safe roads. With Taliban patrols guarding highways, caravans of goods could travel without being looted. This practical order earned them backing from many Afghans who were tired of chaos. Step by step, the Taliban expanded. In 1994, they took Kandahar and turned it into their base of power. From there, they swept across southern Afghanistan. The Taliban advanced toward Kabul in 1996. Inside the capital, the government was led by President Burhanuddin Rabbani. But his forces were divided, weakened by years of fighting with rival warlords. As the Taliban closed in, Rabbani's position collapsed. He fled the city, leaving Kabul defenseless. When the Taliban entered, they wasted no time. Their white flag was raised over government buildings and across the capital. For the first time since the Soviet withdrawal, one group held full control of Kabul. To the world, it signaled that the Taliban had taken power. To Afghans, it marked the end of one civil war and the beginning of a new kind of rule.
What happened when the Taliban took Kabul in 1996?
When the Taliban seized Kabul in 1996, they claimed they would restore order and protect Afghanistan from outside influence. But almost immediately, their rule opened the door to something much larger: the rise of al-Qaeda. Osama bin Laden had helped fund and fight during the Soviet War. He returned to Afghanistan in the mid-1990s. He brought money, followers, and a clear mission to strike at the United States and its allies. The Taliban gave him safe haven. Osama bin Laden's anger toward the United States was rooted in belief, not wealth. He opposed U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia and America's support for Israel and Western influences in Muslim countries. At the core, he saw the United States as the main obstacle to creating a global Islamic order. For the Taliban, bin Laden was useful. His fortune supported their cause, and his fighters added strength to their ranks. According to the West, both groups also shared an extremist vision: to turn Afghanistan into a base for global holy war. Al-Qaeda built training camps in the mountains and deserts of Afghanistan. From there, they recruited thousands of men from across the Muslim world, teaching them guerrilla warfare and coordinated attacks. According to the US, these camps would later produce the fighters who carried out the attacks on US embassies in East Africa in 1998, and the attack on the USS Cole in 2000. And finally, the 9/11 attacks in 2001. By sheltering al-Qaeda, the West believed the Taliban turned Afghanistan into a launchpad for international terrorism.
Did 9/11 lead to the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan?
On September 11th, 2001, the world changed. It was reported that 19 men linked to al-Qaeda took over 4 passenger planes in the United States. 2 were flown into the World Trade Center towers in New York. Another struck the Pentagon near Washington, D.C. The last crashed in Pennsylvania after passengers fought back. Nearly 3,000 people lost their lives that day. The attacks shocked America and the world. Within hours, U.S. intelligence traced the plot back to al-Qaeda, operating inside Afghanistan under the protection of the Taliban. President George W. Bush made a clear demand: the Taliban must hand over Osama bin Laden and shut down al-Qaeda's training camps. The Taliban refused. They said bin Laden was a guest and would not be surrendered without proof. That refusal sealed Afghanistan's fate. In October 2001, the United States and its allies launched Operation Enduring Freedom. U.S. aircrafts bombed Taliban positions, while American and British special forces worked alongside Afghan fighters, opposed to Taliban rule. Within weeks, the Taliban's defenses crumbled. Kabul fell in November. By December, the Taliban were driven from most major cities. The United States declared victory. The Taliban seemed defeated, but this was not the end. It was the beginning of America's longest war. Why did the U.S. stay in Afghanistan for 20 years? After the Taliban collapsed in late 2001, the United States promised to rebuild Afghanistan. The goal, at least on paper, was not only to destroy al-Qaeda, but also to create a new Afghan government that would be friendly to the West. Billions of dollars poured into building roads, building schools and hospitals. New leaders were chosen, with Hamid Karzai becoming the first president under U.S. support. For a moment, it seemed like Afghanistan had a chance at stability. But here's the truth. The U.S. mission quickly expanded from hunting terrorists to trying to nation build. This meant creating a democracy in a country that had been torn apart by decades of war. Corruption spread through the new Afghan government. Much of the aid money was stolen by the elites. In the countryside, ordinary people saw little change. Meanwhile, the Taliban regrouped. They crossed into Pakistan, found safe havens, and slowly rebuilt their strength. By the mid-2000s, they were launching new attacks inside Afghanistan. US and NATO troops were dragged into a cycle of fighting the Taliban, holding ground and then losing it again. The war stretched on. American presidents came and went, each vowing to end the conflict, yet sending more troops. The cost in lives and money grew staggering. Over 2,400 American soldiers lost their lives, and tens of thousands of Afghans, both fighters and civilians, lost their lives. Why did America stay in Afghanistan for 20 years? In 2021, the United States made its final move. After 2 decades of war, 4 presidents, and trillions of dollars spent, the plan was simple. End America's longest war, but the exit was anything but simple. When US forces began pulling out, the Afghan government that Washington had backed for years collapsed almost overnight. The Afghan army, trained and armed with modern weapons, laid down their rifles. Many soldiers switched sides or just walked away. The Taliban, who had never fully disappeared, swept through city after city with little resistance. By August, they entered Kabul. The world watched chaos unfold as thousands of Afghans crowded the airport, desperate to escape. US helicopters lifted off from the embassy roof, an image that reminded many of Vietnam. The Taliban were back in charge, carrying their white flag through the streets.
Was the Afghanistan war built on lies?
When the towers fell on September 11, 2001, almost 3,000 lives were lost. The official story said al-Qaeda, sheltered by the Taliban, carried out the attack. When the towers fell on September 11, 2001, almost 3,000 lives were lost. But from the start, not everyone believed that was the whole truth. Some asked if 9/11 was a setup. They argued that US leaders wanted a reason to launch wars in the Middle East. Wars that would give them access to resources, power, and global control. They pointed to how quickly plans for invasion and the Patriot Act came together, almost as if they were ready before the attacks. Others said the goal was unity. Before 9/11, America was deeply divided. After the attacks, the country rallied behind President Bush. Approval ratings soared, and a fearful nation gave its leaders more power to act at home and abroad. But from the start, some people believed there was more to the story. Former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney raised questions about whether the government knew more than it admitted. Academic David Ray Griffin wrote books claiming the attacks could not have happened the way officials said. A group called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth argued the towers looked like a planned demolition. Even celebrities spoke up. Actor Charlie Sheen said he did not trust the official story. Musician Mos Def and comedian Rosie O'Donnell also voiced doubts. Filmmaker Michael Moore suggested in his documentaries that oil and power were driving the war. These claims spread because many already did not trust the government. Black communities remembered Tuskegee experiment. For Muslims in America and Europe, conspiracy theories mixed with anger. They saw mosques raided, people detained, and communities blamed for something they did not do. But for millions, doubts still remain. Was the war for security, or was it for control? Every war has two sides, the one polished for the books, and the unfiltered truth they tried to bury. Watch next The Untold Side of War, where we expose the whole truth. That's a wrap, history seekers. Getting to the roots is where history comes alive. We uncover the truth about Africa, African Americans, and American history, one story at a time. Thanks for watching. Peace and love.